I remember that evening in my suburban neighborhood clearly because everything felt too quiet for comfort. The usual hum of distant cars and dogs barking had disappeared, leaving a silence that pressed against the walls. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, heating a simple dinner, and the emptiness outside felt almost deliberate. Something in that stillness made my skin prickle like it always does when you know you're being watched. The soft glow from the neighboring porch lights usually brought comfort, but that night they seemed dimmer, muted, almost withdrawn. Shadows stretched oddly across the street, shifting in ways that didn't make sense under the steady street lamp. I found myself glancing toward the front door repeatedly, though no one had any reason to come by. The house felt heavier than normal, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I tried focusing on my plate, telling myself I was just imagining things, but a chill lingered in the air. My chair creaked as I shifted slightly, and for a moment, I thought I heard a soft tap from the door. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me pause mid-bite and listen. The quiet of the neighborhood pressed in even harder, making each small sound feel amplified and threatening. Something knocked at the door, soft and deliberate, breaking the fragile calm completely. My heart skipped, and I froze in my chair, staring at the door as if it would answer me. I lived alone, and yet a voice suddenly came through the closed door, clear and casual, saying, "Your food's getting cold." I couldn't move. My mind kept insisting this was impossible. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was a prank, maybe someone playing a joke in the neighborhood. My eyes darted to the window, but no one was there, and the street remained empty. The voice repeated, slightly closer, almost smug, as though it had stepped inside the house unseen. I couldn't make sense of it. The air itself felt thick, like I was trapped in a quiet nightmare. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the room, yet I remained frozen, gripping my fork like it could protect me. The shadows in the corners of the kitchen seemed to shift subtly toward the door. My mind raced, trying to find any logical explanation, any way this could make sense. The voice came again, this time almost whispering, and my stomach dropped with dread. I finally forced my legs to move, stepping cautiously toward the hallway, my ears straining for any sound beyond my own footsteps. Each creak of the floorboards echoed unnaturally loud, and my chest tightened. The door was closed, but I could feel the presence of someone, or something, on the other side. It wasn't yelling, it wasn't demanding, it was simply there, and it knew I could hear it. I grabbed my phone from the counter, considering calling someone, anyone, but the signal felt weaker than usual, almost as if the house itself resisted it. My dinner sat untouched on the table, growing cold with every second, and the absurdity of the statement from the voice hit me harder. "Your food's getting cold," it had said, a casual threat that made my blood run cold. Logic failed me, and panic seeped in quietly. I moved back to the table, unsure if I was braver or foolish, and glanced at the shadows dancing on the walls. The house remained silent except for the faint ticking of the clock, but I couldn't shake the sense that someone was lingering just beyond vision. My fork trembled in my hand, and the warmth of the meal I had looked forward to felt meaningless now. Every instinct told me to run, yet curiosity pinned me to my chair. The last thing I remember before the night stretched into something unrecognizable was the soft sound of footsteps retreating from the door. There was no knocking this time, no voice, just the eerie echo of presence that left me trembling. I sat frozen, staring at my plate, unsure whether to eat or run, wondering if it would ever be quiet again. The memory of that voice lingers even now, casual and threatening, leaving the night permanently unsettled. The next evening, I tried to convince myself that what happened yesterday was a trick of the mind. I kept the lights on, sitting at the same table, pretending nothing could reach me here. The suburban streets outside looked harmless in the daylight, the porch lights warm and familiar again. I told myself the quiet had just been ordinary, that I was imagining shadows and voices in the night. I was halfway through dinner when a sudden knock at the door froze me in place. My hand hovered over the fork, unwilling to move but unable to ignore it. The sound was soft, almost casual, yet it carried the same weight as the voice from before. "Your food's getting cold," it said again, the words carrying that same calm menace that made my chest tighten. I pressed my back against the chair, staring at the door as if that would keep me safe. No one was visible through the window, no silhouettes in the porch light. My mind raced through every possible explanation, trying to ground myself in reason. The suburban calm of my neighborhood now felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter under the slightest pressure. I debated calling someone, but each time I reached for the phone, it felt heavier, like a trap waiting for me to act. The warmth of the dinner on the table seemed irrelevant in the presence of something unseen. I could feel it hovering just beyond the door, patient, watching me struggle between fear and disbelief. Each second stretched longer, the ordinary suburban setting now feeling like a stage for something impossible. Then, I heard the soft scrape of shoes across the front porch, slow and deliberate, approaching the door. My stomach knotted as my mind tried to rationalize the sound, imagining a neighbor or delivery driver. But the timing, the precision of the movement, didn't match anything normal. The voice's words echoed again in my memory. "Your food's getting cold," as if the speaker existed only to unsettle me. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy cookbook, and held it tight while inching toward the door. My fingers trembled, the suburban night suddenly foreign and threatening. The porch light cast unnatural shadows on the walls, bending the familiar shapes into something sinister. I forced my breathing to slow, telling myself it was only a prank or a coincidence, but the voice had left its mark. I leaned close to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. No figure, no movement, just the soft glow of the porch light. And yet, I could feel the weight of someone's attention, as if the house itself acknowledged the presence. My dinner remained untouched behind me, growing colder with every heartbeat. Every sound outside felt amplified, and the suburban street seemed to hum with a quiet anticipation that made my skin crawl. For a long moment, I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe normally, only listening. The calm night betrayed nothing, yet the sense of being observed never faded. I wondered if anyone else had ever experienced this, or if living alone just made you more susceptible to the impossible. Fear had rooted itself inside me, slow and suffocating, creeping into even the familiar corners of my home. Eventually, I backed away from the door and sat down again, my mind refusing to accept logic. Every muscle in my body remained tense, waiting for the impossible to announce itself again. The suburban quiet outside made the house feel smaller, each room closing in like it knew something I didn't. Even the simple act of eating seemed impossible now, as if every bite would invite that voice back. I finished the night staring at the door, listening, trapped in the memory of something that may never have a face. The following night, I decided to ignore the voice and the knocking, determined not to let it control me. I sat at my kitchen table, the suburban street outside quiet and familiar under the soft glow of porch lights. The dinner I prepared felt heavier in my hands, as though the simple act of eating was now a challenge. Every creak of the house sounded sharper, echoing through the empty rooms with a weight that pressed against my nerves. Halfway through the meal, a faint knock at the door made my heart lurch. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just a branch hitting the frame, yet the voice returned with unnerving clarity. "Your food's getting cold." It was calm, almost casual, as if mocking my very existence. My stomach twisted as I realized ignoring it did nothing. The presence was relentless and patient. I gripped the edge of the table, unsure whether to stand, flee, or simply stay seated and hope it left. My eyes darted to the window, but the suburban street appeared empty, the familiar houses silent and normal. The voice seemed to exist outside of reason, but the fear it invoked was entirely tangible. Every instinct screamed that I was not alone, even though nothing visible proved it. I slowly moved toward the door, my legs stiff, my mind racing for any explanation that made sense. The porch light cast distorted shadows across the walls, turning familiar shapes into something threatening. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything beyond the faint night breeze. And then, silence. Thick, suffocating, and almost louder than any sound could be. I took a step back and noticed my dinner had gone cold, the fork resting uselessly on the plate. The absurdity of the statement hit me again, and I shivered at the thought of someone, or something, standing unseen just beyond the door. My hands trembled, and I realized that the suburban comfort I once relied on no longer offered protection. The presence had infiltrated my home, turning the familiar into something unrecognizable. I sat down again, my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo in the quiet, punctuating the tension in the room. The simple act of eating had become a challenge, every bite reminding me of the voice that had invaded my life. I realized I could never completely ignore it, that its patience made it more terrifying than any immediate threat. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, I couldn't tell. Time felt distorted. Every sound from outside, every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept thinking I saw movement through the corner of my eye, shadows stretching toward the door, retreating when I looked directly. My suburban neighborhood, once comforting and predictable, had become the backdrop for a presence I could neither explain nor confront. By the time I forced myself to finish the dinner, I realized that the voice wasn't leaving. It wasn't in a hurry. It existed alongside me, patient and knowing. I cleaned the dishes mechanically, my mind replaying every word, every knock, every shadow that had unnerved me. Even in the familiar safety of my home, I felt exposed, as if the voice had claimed a part of my space I could never reclaim. That night, I finally sat back in my chair, staring at the front door with a mixture of fear and resignation. I knew it could return, and no matter what I did, I would never feel completely safe in my home again. The suburban calm was a lie. The presence lingered invisibly, and every ordinary sound reminded me it was there. I finished the night in silence, the voice's casual warning echoing endlessly in my mind. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It was early evening, the kind where sunlight filters softly through the blinds and the neighborhood hums with mundane activity. I was sitting at the table with my parents and younger brother, carving into the roast I'd been looking forward to all day. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and baked potatoes, and yet a subtle unease prickled at the back of my neck. Something felt off, though nothing visible suggested it. My brother suddenly froze mid-bite and pointed behind me, his small voice breaking the quiet. "Who's sitting there?" he asked, eyes wide and trembling. I turned slowly, expecting a shadow or reflection, but the chair behind me was empty. Even the glow from the dining room chandelier seemed duller, as if light itself hesitated to touch that space. I laughed nervously, reaching to ruffle his hair, trying to dismiss the moment as childish imagination. But he shook his head, whispering, "She's looking at us, and she's crying." My fork hovered in midair, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the ordinary suburban dining room suddenly alien. Even my parents looked uneasy, glancing toward the empty chair with unspoken concern. Trying to regain composure, I asked him what the lady looked like, hoping to turn fear into conversation. He described a woman with a pale face and a trembling expression, tears streaming silently, her eyes fixed on us. My parents exchanged wary looks, the casual calm of dinner dissolving into tension. The air seemed heavier, like someone had pressed down the walls around us, compressing every sound into something sharper. I shifted slightly in my chair, my back prickling as if the presence he described was just behind me. My parents continued eating cautiously, speaking softly, each word measured. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of light, a reflection from the window or chandelier, but instinct gnawed at me. The dinner table, once warm and inviting, now felt like the center of an unseen scrutiny. My brother's trembling grew more noticeable, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "She wants us to help her," he whispered, voice barely audible, eyes never leaving the empty space. I swallowed hard, realizing the fear was not just his, it had begun to seep into me as well. The ordinary suburban night outside now felt distant and irrelevant, unable to reach the tension pressing on our family. I stood abruptly, attempting to peer over the back of the chair, my legs stiff with apprehension. Nothing was there, yet the sense of being watched persisted, tangible and oppressive. Shadows from the chandelier stretched along the walls, dancing unnaturally in the corners of my vision. The presence, if it existed, did not need to make noise. Its effect was in the weight it placed on the room. I returned to my seat slowly, trying to steady my breathing and ignore the shiver crawling down my spine. Each bite of food tasted bland and heavy, my appetite gone, replaced by a knot of tension. My brother continued to whisper quietly, commenting on how the woman's tears never stopped. Even my parents' quiet murmurs felt strained, as though they, too, sensed something hovering just beyond perception. By the time dinner ended, the room felt exhausted, the air thick with a quiet dread. The empty chair behind me seemed to linger in my mind longer than any person could. My brother clung to his chair edge, pale and wide-eyed, while I struggled to reassure him with hollow words. The suburban calm outside could not touch the tension inside, leaving us with a silent, unanswered fear that would follow us long after the plates were cleared. The next evening, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, hoping a normal routine could erase the unease. The suburban streets outside glowed softly under the warm porch lights, children's laughter echoing faintly from distant yards. I prepared dinner with my parents and brother, trying to focus on the simple rhythm of cooking. Yet every so often, a shadow seemed to linger longer than it should, and my brother's eyes kept flicking toward the chair behind me. He didn't speak at first, just stared with wide eyes and clenched fists. "She's closer tonight," he whispered after a long pause. My heart skipped, and I forced myself to swallow and nod, trying to remain calm. The room felt different somehow, the air heavier, like the walls themselves were holding back something just out of sight. I tried to keep conversation light, asking about school and neighborhood news, but he barely answered, still focused on the empty chair. I could feel my pulse quicken with each passing second, a quiet alarm warning me that something unseen had entered our space. The ordinary suburban kitchen seemed smaller, every shadow elongated, every object amplified in a strange tension. Then, a faint movement caught my eye, a subtle flicker of air near the chair as if someone had just exhaled. My brother's whispers grew more urgent. "She's trying to tell us something. Listen!" I froze, straining to notice any shift, but the room remained silent, normal in every visible way. The contrast between perception and reality made my stomach churn with unease. My parents now spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward the chair nervously, each word carefully measured. The sound of cutlery against plates became unnaturally loud, echoing in the thick air. I tried to rationalize it, curtains moving, a trick of light, but instinct refused, nagging that what my brother perceived was real. Even the smell of the food, usually comforting, felt muted, overshadowed by the tension gripping the room. I stood up slowly, circling the table, trying to see what my brother saw, but the chair remained empty. Shadows shifted unnaturally across the walls, stretching long and sharp under the chandelier. My brother's gaze remained locked, unblinking, as if communicating silently with something invisible. The ordinary suburban evening had transformed into a stage for something incomprehensible, subtle yet oppressive. I sat back down cautiously, my hands gripping the edge of the table as if it could anchor me to reality. Every sound outside, the soft hum of the street, distant laughter, felt detached from the suffocating air inside. My brother whispered again, "She wants us to see her, really see her." And the intensity of his words made my chest tighten. I realized that no rational explanation could account for the dread pressing in around us. Dinner concluded quietly, plates scraped clean, yet none of us spoke about the empty chair directly. My brother stayed pale and tense, eyes darting at the chair every few seconds. Even my parents seemed unwilling to acknowledge it, speaking in soft, cautious murmurs, trying to restore normalcy. The suburban calm outside was irrelevant now. Inside, the unseen presence lingered, patient and sorrowful, leaving a weight that refused to lift. The following evening, I resolved to face the tension head-on, refusing to let it dominate our dinner again. The suburban street outside was calm, the warm glow of porch lights casting familiar patterns across neatly trimmed lawns. I set the table carefully, trying to distract my brother with small jokes and conversation. But his attention remained fixed on the chair behind me, eyes wide, fingers tapping nervously against the table's edge. Halfway through the meal, he whispered, "She's holding something. A letter, I think." My fork froze mid-air and I tried to peer over the back of the chair, but nothing was visible. Shadows cast by the chandelier twisted oddly across the walls, elongating in ways that made my chest tighten. The ordinary suburban kitchen, once comforting, now felt like it existed under a different set of rules I couldn't comprehend. I leaned slightly forward, straining to hear or see anything, but the room remained silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. My brother's small voice persisted, It says, help me." I swallowed hard, feeling an icy weight settle into my chest. My parents glanced nervously at one another, their faces pale, but no one spoke a word aloud about the empty chair. The presence had a quiet patience that made the minutes stretch impossibly long. I decided to stand, circling the table, trying to see what he was describing. The chair remained empty, but the air felt heavier near it, almost as if the space itself carried sorrow. I reached a hand toward the backrest, hesitating, feeling a subtle vibration under my fingers. My brother's whisper came again, "She's sad. She doesn't want to be forgotten." The words clung to me, leaving a cold knot in my stomach. My parents whispered between themselves, their voices low and shaky, trying to rationalize what was happening. The normal clinking of cutlery felt intrusive, too loud, and every shadow in the room seemed alive. I realized that whatever presence lingered was patient and subtle, affecting our perception without ever manifesting fully. The suburban home, familiar and safe for so long, had transformed into a space governed by an unseen tension. I returned to my chair cautiously, gripping the edge for stability, while my brother kept whispering details about the letter. He described faint words I could not see, written in a shaky hand, the message simple and haunting. I felt my mind teetering between disbelief and terror, unsure if I should protect him from what he saw or try to see it myself. Every sound and shadow reinforced the presence, yet it remained ungraspable, a whisper at the edge of reality. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely. each tick of the clock magnifying the quiet dread. My brother's small voice kept repeating the same phrases, describing the sadness in the unseen woman's expression. My parents had stopped talking entirely, the usual suburban calm replaced with tense observation. I realized that the presence was not threatening in a conventional sense. It demanded acknowledgement, patience, and attention, leaving us unsettled without visible danger. By the end of the meal, the room remained charged, the empty chair dominating my peripheral vision. My brother finally sat back, exhausted and pale, but he continued glancing toward the chair. The letter he described was gone, or perhaps it had never existed, leaving only the haunting memory of words he could see. The suburban neighborhood outside remained serene and unsuspecting, while inside, the quiet sorrow lingered, marking the space in a way we would never forget. I cleaned up the dishes silently, careful not to disturb the fragile tension, and finally sat down, trying to steady my thoughts. The presence had not vanished, only withdrawn slightly, patient and sorrowful, its gaze invisible yet heavy. The ordinary suburban dinner routine had become a small stage for something unexplainable, leaving an impression that no rational explanation could erase. The memory of that evening and the words whispered by my brother remained with me long after the lights were turned off. It was a quiet evening in our suburban neighborhood, the kind where every house seems identical and the street hums softly under the glow of streetlights. My friend and I were sitting on the back porch, eating takeout and talking about our day at work. The air smelled faintly of damp grass and late summer breeze, ordinary enough to make me feel safe. Yet, a subtle tension lingered, the kind you feel when something small seems slightly out of place. Halfway through a bite, my friend froze, staring intently at the corner of the porch where I wasn't looking. "Do you see the guy sitting with us?" he asked, voice low and wary. I turned, expecting a neighbor or a stray silhouette, but the space beside us was empty, just two chairs pushed back from the table. The casual calm of our suburban evening felt like it had been cracked, leaving a fragile edge of unease. I laughed it off nervously, teasing him about losing focus, but he shook his head and leaned closer, eyes darting around as if confirming something only he could perceive. The soft rustle of leaves in the yard suddenly sounded louder, sharper, almost deliberate. I felt the atmosphere shift subtly, ordinary suburban safety replaced by a prickling tension that refused to be ignored. He whispered again, "He's just sitting there staring. Doesn't move, doesn't blink." My stomach tightened and I forced myself to look over my shoulder, scanning the yard and driveway. There was nothing, only the familiar outline of our backyard, the wooden fence, and distant houses glowing in streetlights. Yet the weight of his gaze, or the one he claimed to see, pressed down on me, making every shadow suspect. Trying to remain calm, I asked him what the man looked like, hoping to rationalize it as imagination. He described a middle-aged man with a plain expression, wearing an old coat, sitting in the dark as if perfectly still and unnoticed by everyone else. I swallowed hard, realizing that the fear wasn't coming from anything visible but from the certainty in my friend's eyes. The ordinary suburban night suddenly felt more fragile than ever. The breeze picked up, rattling the porch chairs slightly, and my friend's gaze never wavered. "He's closer now." "Like he just moved," he murmured. I felt a shiver run down my spine, convincing myself it was just the wind, but instinct gnawed at me. The way he described the figure was precise, patient, and unsettlingly calm, making disbelief almost impossible. I tried to make conversation about anything else, asking about his weekend plans to distract him from the presence. He responded mechanically, still glancing toward the spot where he claimed the man sat. The ordinary sounds of crickets and distant traffic now felt amplified, invasive in the quiet night. I could feel my heartbeat accelerate, the sense of being observed growing stronger with every passing second. I finally leaned forward to stand, intending to see what he was seeing, but the chair remained empty. Shadows cast by the porch light stretched unnaturally across the floorboards, and I felt a strange heaviness in the air, as if space itself had been subtly altered. My friend's whispered commentary continued, describing posture, expression, and something almost human, yet completely unnerving. By the time we finished eating, the air felt thick and charged, the ordinary suburban night failing to reassure either of us. The presence he claimed to see hadn't left, at least in our minds, leaving us both tense and uneasy. Even though nothing concrete existed, the lingering fear and certainty of observation had transformed the calm evening into something fragile and unsettling. The next evening, we decided to have dinner together at my house, hoping the comfort of indoors would ease the tension. The suburban kitchen smelled of roasted vegetables and fresh bread, a familiar, soothing scent. My friend seemed distracted, glancing repeatedly toward the corner of the dining room where he had first noticed the figure. I tried to laugh it off, but the uneasy feeling from the porch lingered like a shadow in my chest. He kept fidgeting, poking at his plate without really eating. "He's here again," he whispered, eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. I turned slowly, scanning the space carefully, but nothing moved, nothing appeared. The ordinary suburban evening was quietly unraveling, each mundane sound now amplified into something sharp and suspicious. I asked him to describe the man in more detail, trying to rationalize the fear, and he spoke in a hushed tone. "He's just sitting there, hands folded, looking at me, like he knows something." My pulse quickened, and the hum of the refrigerator seemed unusually loud. I realized the presence, if it was real, was patient, calm, and disturbingly silent. I tried changing the topic, talking about work and weekend plans, but his attention never wavered from the corner. "He's closer now, closer to the table," he muttered. The way he said it made my skin crawl, a cold weight settling in the room. Shadows stretched across the walls in ways that didn't make sense, bending slightly, as if alive and watching. I stood up, moving toward the corner to inspect it more carefully, my hands trembling slightly. There was still nothing, only the faint glow from the ceiling light and the familiar countertops. Yet the oppressive feeling remained, the certainty in my friend's gaze almost contagious. The suburban kitchen had transformed into a place where ordinary objects felt suspicious and alive. He leaned forward, whispering more details. "He's smiling now, but it's wrong, like he's happy we notice him." The casual suburban calm felt impossible. The familiar kitchen warped by the presence of something we couldn't see but both believed in. Even the smell of dinner now felt muted, swallowed by the tension in the room. I tried to redirect his attention, asking about his day, anything mundane to break the spell. He gave short, distracted answers, eyes darting toward the corner with every movement. The ordinary suburban noises, the hum of the fridge, the soft tapping of utensils, felt amplified, invasive, each sound reminding me of the unseen watcher. I realized that disbelief no longer worked. The fear existed in perception alone. Dinner ended quietly. The plates cleared, but neither of us fully relaxed. The empty corner seemed to dominate my vision, a presence that existed without explanation. The suburban night outside remained calm and normal, unaware of the unease within these walls. What lingered was the certainty that something unseen had observed us, patient and inscrutable, leaving an uncomfortable imprint on our minds. The following night, we decided to meet in my friend's backyard, thinking the open space would make it impossible for the figure to appear. The suburban lawn glowed faintly under the warm light of his patio lamps, and the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. We set up a small table with snacks, laughing nervously to mask our unease. Yet, even in the open, a subtle tension lingered, prickling at the back of my neck like static. He suddenly stopped eating and leaned back, eyes locked on the far edge of the yard. "He's here again, standing by the fence," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the night. I turned to look, but the fence was empty, just the familiar suburban backyard, neat and quiet. Still, the certainty in his eyes made my stomach twist. This was not imagination, but conviction. I tried to rationalize it, suggesting maybe a neighbor or stray animal, anything plausible, but he shook his head. "No, he doesn't move like a person. He just waits." The ordinary suburban evenings seemed to warp, shadows stretching unnaturally under the patio lights. Every small sound, the distant hum of a car, the rustling leaves, suddenly carried a sharp, intrusive edge. He leaned closer, whispering again. "He's holding something, like a book or a box. I can't see clearly." My pulse quickened, and the night air suddenly felt heavier, thick, and almost tangible. I squinted into the dark, but only the neat lawn and wooden fence were visible. Yet my friend's unwavering focus and tone made it impossible to dismiss as mere imagination. I stood up slowly, walking toward the edge of the yard to investigate, my shoes crunching lightly on the gravel path. There was nothing, yet the sense of being watched grew stronger with every step. The shadows of the nearby trees shifted in ways that seemed deliberate, creating angles that didn't exist before. My friend remained seated, eyes wide, describing movements imperceptible to me. He whispered, "He's closer, right behind that tree now. I don't think he wants to leave." The casual suburban calm we had always relied on now felt irrelevant. Every ordinary object, The garden chair, the bird feeder, the fence posts seemed alive with suggestion, as if the presence had claimed them silently. The night stretched long and heavy, each second weighted with unspoken observation. I tried talking to him, joking about our imaginations running wild, but his responses were mechanical, eyes fixed on the figure I couldn't see. The rustling leaves, distant streetlight glow, and faint wind now seemed orchestrated to reinforce the unease. I realized the horror wasn't in seeing, but in knowing that someone, or something, was quietly there, patiently waiting without any overt threat. By the time we left the backyard, the presence had not moved, but its weight lingered. My friend and I walked silently back to the house, each glance toward the fence filled with anticipation and dread. The suburban neighborhood remained calm and unaware, but we both knew something invisible had observed us, leaving a mark we couldn't shake. The ordinary had been pierced by the extraordinary, subtle yet impossible to ignore. We cleaned up quietly inside, trying to shake the feeling, but the night left its mark. Every glance toward corners and open spaces reminded us of the unseen watcher, patient and inscrutable. The fear wasn't in action, but in perception, the awareness that something had been there, had seen us, and remained just out of reach. The suburban calm outside was intact, yet inside, we were unsettled, knowing some presences exist beyond explanation.